than what we talk through from week to week. Um, we've been walking through this sermon series for a long time, navigating through the book of Exodus, and it's been fascinating. I don't know about you, but this journey has been so insightful for me, impacting my own journey, and genuinely has opened my eyes to layers of the original Old Testament story, but then also like details as it impacts the new covenant that has been just fascinating for me. So, what I want to acknowledge today, and I mentioned this in the sermon this past week when we looked at Exodus 24, that on Sunday morning we're kind of jumping over chapters 21, 22, and 23. And that's in part for a couple of reasons. Our goal, as we've kind of broken up the book of Exodus, is to finish it throughout this year, and so we are going to kind of do some more chunks through some chapters as we get toward the end. And also, I think that 21, 22, and 23, while they are chapters that are individual, they really cluster together, and I want to acknowledge them that way. So this is an attempt to genuinely honor each chapter through Exodus. We don't want to ignore something that's helpful, but also want to kind of outline it and treat it in these sections that it was designed to be. For example, there are two things I want to connect from what we have seen through the story of Exodus. One, if you'll recall, back in chapter 16 and 17 and 18, through that part of the saga as Israel moves closer to Mount Sinai, we saw an encounter where Moses is reunited with his family. He has this great opportunity to share with his father-in-law what God has done. And through that chapter and in that encounter, we also see it being brought to Moses' attention, like, hey, man, you're doing too much. You can't act as the judge for everybody and all of these people. So let's establish some shared leadership and set up some different judges to hear the cases of the people. And so that was done, and the pressure was relieved, and we saw the value of that multiplied and shared leadership. They continue in the journey. Now, this past week, we looked at 24, and in chapter 24, there's this beautiful picture of covenant, the formal ceremony between God and his people, the blood being shed, the blood being sprinkled. We talked about the beauty and the nuance of that story. But what is mentioned there and reinforced a couple of times is that Moses wrote down all that God had commanded him up on the mountain. And this book of covenant was read before the people, and all of the people said, we'll do it. We will abide by what you say. Well, the things that were written down were more than just Exodus 20 and what we formerly would call the Ten Commandments. Exodus 21 through 23 are the layers of detail on what was written down in the book of the covenant. I think this is important for a couple of reasons. One, this gives a description of the written word at that time. It also, when we look at what is included in this covenant book or this written word from Exodus 21 through 23, we can see the application is it's empowering those leaders who were commissioned to judge with now some written law for people and how they would interact, how they would engage with one another, and then the written standard that they would be expected to follow as a society is built to move forward genuinely with law that we would see in the laws of our land today, whether they be national law, state laws, or local laws. If we want to look at chapters 21 through 23, and I'm going to be referring back to my notes here on my laptop. There's a lot of things here I don't want to miss. We're going to see kind of 5 general topics covered in 21 through 23. Some specific ideas are relating to slavery in 21, 1 through 11. some very specific statements about murder in 21:12 through 17 that even goes in greater detail than the one simple statement in the Ten Commandments of thou shalt not kill. In 21:18 through 32, there are some other detailed statements about violent crime or violent offenses, what is inappropriate and how that should be punished or treated. 21:33 through 22:17 outlines property rights. What happens if someone takes something that's yours? And then 22:18 through 23 is just kind of a broad description of what we would categorize as other laws. So, out of this are going to come some preliminary guidelines that would later could be referred to even today when we start to look at some scriptural evidence for abortion, capital punishment, some common statements that you may be familiar with: an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, sex crimes, robbery, restitution, what to do with fallow farmland. So there's so many kind of beneficial things for a society to move forward with that are described in 21:23. And I think the timing that these commands are given to the people of Israel, because when they release from Mount Sinai and they begin the journey to the Promised Land, they're going to need a framework on which to live out this covenant relationship that God has given them. I think it is helpful for us to see a couple of things on what this can mean for us. By the time we see Christ come into the scene, this written law had really taken on a life of its own. These laws had developed lots of interpretations and had expanded to almost like an unbearable burden of rules and restrictions that the Pharisees loved to develop. In fact, I would say there is, when we look at, in the absence of some written law, that 400-year period of the Maccabees, later, during the time of Christ, in that 0 to 100 AD time period, the Talmudim is written, and it kind of codified even some of the greater details of how this was developed and this burden. And Jesus even comes in, kind of signifying the hypocrisy that the Pharisees had on all of this law breaking and preventing it. And unfortunately, it had, in its burden that it had developed, they had missed the point of relationship. And so I do think as we look back to this today, under the new covenant, there's so much of this that it's beneficial, but doesn't really define the relationship that we have with God. Hebrews helps us unpack some of this so well. But I do think we see the value and the benefit of written law to govern a nation. We do see, Galatians 3 would help us understand this, that looking back to the law helps expose our sin, helps us expose our depravity and our need for Christ, and ultimately to direct us to understand and do the will of God, Romans 2, Romans 12. So I think there's tremendous value in us looking back to see what insight we could gain, but also avoiding the misunderstanding that the laws, the specific written laws of Israel are also the specific written laws of Columbus, Georgia. I think if we do that, we miss the point. So I want you to be encouraged by what's most important for us to see is the benefit and the context of when these laws were given to the people of Israel. More importantly, that we will press in like we did in our sermon this past week to Exodus 24 to see that these built the framework to understand the need for redemption and establishes the framework that the new covenant is built upon. So many references could be made to see Hebrews. In fact, I would say we can't really fully grasp Hebrews without understanding Exodus. These chapters are so linked together I would also say, for those of you that are part of our Calvary family, there is some intentionality that we spent a year or so ago walking through Hebrews, and now we're also seeing Exodus so that we can more fully connect those dots. So this is just a very brief summary of 21 through 23 to explain the structure and the content of these chapters and the laws, to see how they fit and how they build and set the stage for Exodus 24, which we spent some time in this past week. So in no way am I going to intend to adequately cover all these chapters in these 15 or 20 minutes together, but I did want to summarize them to make sure we're honoring the text. We're not just skipping over it and ignoring it, but also helping us see how it fits in the full picture of the covenant relationship that we walk in with God. So it may very well be that this has prompted questions for you. I guarantee you I haven't answered every question, haven't even tried to in this. So don't hesitate to reach out if we could help you along the way. As always, check out our website, listen to last week's sermon, and along the way, if there's anything that we can do to help you, don't hesitate to reach out. So until next time, God bless.